So utilitarianism is a process of decision making that is used by most of our governments. It's a process that they use to decide how do we use our scarce resources, typically that's our budget, to benefit the most citizens. This is the process that we'll talk about a little more in depth here in a minute, but I'd like to start with a quote by G.K. Chesterton. He says that art, like morality, consists of drawing the line somewhere. And I truly believe that we need to have moral lines that we are not willing to cross. We need to know where our personal moral lines are. In general, ethical decisions are based on their consequences under utilitarianism. So we're looking at only the result of our decision, not necessarily the process of our decision. And utilitarianism says that that act is right if it is useful in bringing about a desirable or good end. So we're totally looking at the consequences, the results of our decision making. And it says that everyone should perform that act or follow that moral rule that will bring about the greatest good or happiness for the greatest number of people. Now you'll see in a lot of readings about ethics and morality, they call good happiness. And happiness doesn't necessarily refer to joy, but to I'm happy with the results, I got a good impact on me, and that makes me happy. And also the benefits must outweigh the negative aspects of the decision. And this can be as narrow as the benefits were good and 51% good and 49% negative, or impacted 49% of the people negatively. It's still considered a moral decision as long as those benefits outweighed the bad. Utilitarianism also considers future generations. If we make a decision that is good in the short term but very harmful in the long term, is going to harm future generations, then it's not considered a very good moral decision. An example of this might be the case of eminent domain. Texas is growing, our population is growing, and we're going to eventually need more water. The state is considering damming the Navasota River to create a large reservoir that will provide water to the area cities, all the area cities around Bryan College Station and potentially even Houston or maybe even Austin. So states can take land like this if it's for the greater good, because millions of people would benefit from the water in the reservoir while a limited number, and I'm just going to throw a number out there and say 25 people or families, would be harmed because their land was taken. Now the state can't just take their land, they have to pay them the fair market value, but as you can imagine, ownership of land is a far greater thing than just the economic value of it. Some of these people may have owned that land for many generations. And so this limited number of people are going to be harmed by the taking of their land. This is an example of utilitarianism, trying to benefit the greater good for a limited number of people. An example of utilitarian decision is in the 1982 movie The Wrath of Khan, which is the second movie in the Star Trek series. The Enterprise is under attack from Khan, and the Enterprise has been severely damaged, and Khan is moving in for the final shot that's going to destroy the Enterprise and her crew. So Mr. Spock enters an area that is high in radiation in order to fix the warp drive. Now the radiation would normally kill a human pretty quickly, but as Mr. Spock is half Vulcan, he can tolerate this radiation for a short period of time. So he fixes the warp drive, the Enterprise escapes destruction and defeats Khan, but in the end, Mr. Spock dies. And as he says his goodbyes to Captain Kirk, he reminds Kirk that there's a Vulcan proverb that says the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, and in this case, the one. And so this concept of sacrificing one for the benefit of many is a utilitarian concept. Now there are two philosophers that promoted utilitarianism, Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, both English philosophers and reformers. They introduced utilitarianism as a rational way to make political or administrative decisions. They felt that these decisions previously were based on feelings or irrational prejudices, and they felt like utilitarianism was a much more logical way to make a decision. And as we've said before, utilitarianism is what drives most of our public policy decisions. If you think about natural disasters such as hurricanes and earthquakes, there's a limited amount of relief that they can get into an area at a time, and so they have to decide how can they administer this relief to benefit the most people. Bentham and Mills both say that we need to identify all the possible actions that we can do that will address our question or address our issue. We got to kind of try to estimate the cost versus the benefits, because again, we have to have 51% benefits, 49% negative aspects of our costs. And then we need to select that alternative that provides the greatest good based on those cost-benefit analysis. As we said, governments do this all the time when they're talking about how to spend their budgets. The state of Texas right now is in session, and they're talking about, how can we utilize our budget to best benefit the most citizens. Here's another example of utilitarianism in action. So anytime there's like a mass casualty event, so there's a plane crash, anything like that, you're taught by the American Red Cross Association to apply resources to benefit the most people. So in other words, it's a mass casualty event. You have a lot of people that are injured. Some are slightly injured, to some that are deathly injured. They're going to die. There's just nothing you do to them. And there's all the people with injuries in between. And so the rule in mass casualty events is that you don't tie up a resource to benefit only one or a few people. So for instance, once you start CPR on someone, you've tied up a responder giving CPR to that one person. And so the rules under mass casualty events, according to the American Red Cross handbook training, is that you triage these people and you don't tie up a resource performing CPR. You might show somebody quickly how to do CPR and have them do it, but as a responder, and there's only a few responders to all the casualties, you can't tie yourself up performing CPR on that person. There are people that if you utilize your knowledge and resources, you can save them easily, and you can save many more of those people. And so the rule is, you don't start treating some very seriously injured persons, or even you stop their care if you can't save their lives, because the rule in mass casualty events is to save as many people as you can. Here's another example. In 2005, after Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, in the days after, where the downtown area flooded, it flooded several hospitals as well. And in Memorial Hospital, the flooding caused power loss. It flooded their generators, and so they didn't have any electricity. So respirators didn't work. There was no water, fresh water flowing, no water in the toilets or anything like that. And evacuation was only possible by helicopter. And so they started evacuating people. And many hospitals evacuated the most ill first, got them out, and then they evacuated the less ill. And you would normally think that that would be how you benefit the most people. You get the most ill out first, where they can be quickly treated, and those with less serious illnesses, you get them out later, because they can tolerate being there, and they can tolerate waiting a while. But this hospital made the decision to evacuate their healthy people first. So they evacuated all their babies, and then got all their healthy people out first. As a result, they left the most ill for evacuation last, and many of those people died. They had a pretty high death rate in their hospital over those hospitals that evacuated their most seriously ill first. And so this is an example of kind of a backwards utilitarianism, where they thought they were benefiting the most people, but in the end, they lost some. So Jeremy Bentham, there's actually two forms of utilitarianism: act and rule utilitarianism. Jeremy Bentham proposed act utilitarianism, and he essentially says everyone should perform that act that'll bring about the greatest good over the greatest bad for those concerned. Again, he's looking at the consequences, and he's saying that the ends justify the means. Now, if you remember when we talked about utilitarianism in the previous module, in utilitarianism, the people are the means. But in this case, in utilitarianism, the ends are what justify the means. And so there's a popular TV show called The Blacklist, and in this show, one of the FBI's top 10 most wanted criminals shows up at the FBI one day and turns himself in. And in the process, he says, look, I turned myself in because I want to help you, and you can help me. I'm willing to give you a list of people, the blacklist, that these people are so bad that they actually cause more harm than I do, and you don't even know these people exist. That's why they're called the blacklist. And so I'll turn over these super criminals to you and help you eliminate them if you allow me to continue doing what I do and being free, and you don't pursue me. And so the FBI agreed to this process because they saw that working with Raymond Reddington would benefit far more people by taking down the people on the blacklist. So they did that act. The end, working with a bad guy, the means, working with a bad guy, justifies the end, getting even worse bad guys off the list, out of circulation. Now, these are issues with utilitarianism, both act and rule utilitarianism. We really don't know what the consequences on other people might be. We can estimate consequences, but we can't figure out the actual consequences on other people. And then again, how can we measure happiness, or how can we measure benefit or impact? Just some things to think about. Now, John Stuart Mill was a proponent of rule utilitarianism. He said that everyone should always establish and follow that rule that will bring about the greatest good for all concerned. And if you think about our laws, most of our lawmakers follow rule utilitarianism. They're trying to create those rules that benefit the most people. So when they say you can't speed, that may be an imposition on you, but it saves a lot of lives. Again, it has the same difficulties that act utilitarianism does. It's difficult to determine the consequences on other people. And if you think about it, almost all rules have some exceptions. They make exceptions for some people. In fact, utilitarianism has a couple of really serious flaws, if you will, as a theory, as a philosophy for making decisions. So the greatest good often looks different in the short term rather than the long term. And we see most political leaders, especially, they're making decisions to address short-term problems. What's happening now, what's going to happen in the next year. They're really not looking 5 and 10 years down the road, not very often anyway. Leaders need to see what the greatest good looks like in context of the bigger picture. And I think they're trying to do this right now in Congress with the debt ceiling. Every year they just increase the debt ceiling and increase the debt ceiling over and over. And that addresses that year's financial needs. We've got money to spend. But now we're $32 trillion in debt. That's not sustainable. And so now they are looking at the big picture, looking longer term, trying to not raise the debt ceiling very much, but trying to start reducing spending so that we don't have to keep raising that debt ceiling, because raising the debt ceiling every year is an unsustainable thing in the long run. Another problem with utilitarianism is that it discounts the worth of the individual. We're always looking for what's the greatest good for the greatest number, and there are times when we need to take care of those in the minority. You think about the shortage of baby formula we had a year or two ago. We had to prioritize the distribution of baby formula. There were some children that had to have baby formula because of very specific dietary restrictions or allergies. And so a certain kind of formula was the only thing they could take. And so in that case, we couldn't say, well, everybody gets, a case of formula that wants it. we needed to provide more formula to those babies that specifically had to have it. And oddly enough, the Star Trek 3 movie was called The Search for Spock, so he dies in Star Trek 2, but then we're looking for him in Star Trek 3, where the philosophy was flipped. The needs of the few outweigh the needs of the many. So you're just going to have to watch Star Trek 3 to see how that worked out. In the story you had to read about Roy Vagelos and Merck Pharmaceuticals creating a cure for river blindness, this is an example of utilitarianism. So river blindness happens in sub-Saharan Africa, and at the time it affected over 85 million people from the countries kind of outlined in that box below. It's caused by the larva of a fly that breeds in fast-flowing rivers. When the fly bites a person, it lays their eggs, and those eggs develop into larvae in the bloodstream, and then those larvae travel throughout the body, and they impact a person's eyesight as well as skin lesions and other things like that. It hits people, it causes blindness in young adulthood, and like I said, some painful skin lesions. And people essentially, when they lose their sight, they lose their productivity. And it was a common sight in many of these villages to see young people leading blind people around the village. But that all changed thanks to the leadership of Roy Vagelos at Merck Chemical Company. So Roy was the director of research at Merck in 1979. And that year, one of his top researchers, Bill Campbell, noticed that one of Merck's current animal products could also treat the larvae that caused river blindness. And he requested permission to begin research on human applications. And Roy Vagelos said yes. Now, the development of a new drug at that time cost about $200 million. It costs much more than that now, obviously. But the potential market for this new drug was virtually zero. If you think about it, these people lived in sub-Saharan South Africa. They lived in very remote villages. And, even if this pill cost $1 or $2 a piece, many of the people couldn't afford to purchase it. So Roy was really looking ahead and thinking about how can we benefit people over profits. And so he authorized Bill Campbell to start this research. In 1987, the USDA approved this new drug. It's called Mectizan. And human tests showed that it was a miracle drug. It cured river blindness, it killed the larvae, it prevented blindness, it healed people's skin lesions would heal, so it was really seen as a miracle drug. But again, there was no way to distribute it. There aren't Walgreens in sub-Saharan South Africa. And, if they did, the people really can't afford it, even though they only need 1 to 2 pills each year. So Roy Vagelos approved the research on the new drug. In 1987, it was approved, and Roy realized that this drug was going to sit on the shelf if we didn't distribute it. So he agreed to produce Mectizan, and in the early years, Merck Chemical Company even paid for the distribution of this pill to people in sub-Saharan South Africa. Once the success of this drug was seen, then other people started picking up and helping with the cost and expenses. And for the first few years, Merck Chemical Company footed the entire bill. So how could a leader like Roy Vagelos make such a decision? Well, if you look at Merck's mission statement, it's to discover, develop, and provide innovative products that save and improve lives around the world. Vagelos wouldn't see a life-saving drug set on the shelf. Merck's values simply state that they must impact the people, and if you will note, in that mission statement, it doesn't say anything about profits. It's all about saving people. It was George Merck's philosophy that doing the right thing would eventually bring about good things to the company, and that philosophy was part of Merck's culture. So Roy's decision fit perfectly with the organization's mission and values, and this is what it looks like when a company practices utilitarianism. So in summary, utilitarianism wants to make a decision where we have the greatest good for the greatest number of people. that the good consequences have to outweigh the bad in our decisions, and it appears that the ends justify the means is that philosophy. But in the end, the means also must be moral.